The Blitz began on the 7th of September 1940, Black Saturday, when German bombers attacked London, leaving 430 dead and 1,600 injured. London was then bombed for 57 consecutive nights, and often during the day too. London experienced regular attacks, and on the 10th and 11th of May 1941 was hit by its biggest raid. German bombers dropped 711 tons of high explosives, 2,393 incendiaries, 1,436 civilians were killed. However, this proved to be the last major raid until January 1943. While London was bombed more heavily and more often than anywhere else in Britain, the Blitz was an attack on the whole country. Very few areas were left untouched by air raids. In relatively small impact cities, the impact of severe air raids could be devastating. From mid-November 1940, major cities and industrial centres were targeted. In early 1941, another wave of attacks began, primarily against ports. Respite finally came from June, when much of the Luftwaffe was directed against Russia and targets in the Mediterranean. In these 9 months, over 43,500 civilians were killed. Coventry, an important engineering and armaments producing centre, was raided on the 14th and 15th of November 1940. German bombers dropped 503 tons of high explosives and 30,000 incendiary bombs on the city. 568 people were killed, 850 seriously injured. The medieval cathedral was destroyed. Almost 1/3 of the city's houses were made uninhabitable, and 35% of the shops were destroyed. In a relatively small city with a population of just over 200,000, everyone knew someone killed or injured in the raid. Southampton was hit by 2 serious raids on the nights of the 23rd of November and the 30th of November. During the second of these raids, which lasted 6 hours, 800 high explosive bombs were dropped. The auxiliary fire service were short of firefighters, and reinforcements had to be brought in from other areas. The water, the gas, the electricity supplies were all cut off in many areas. The city authorities struggled to cope with the aftermath of the raids, and its municipal leaders widely criticised. Cardiff in South Wales was bombed on the 2nd of January 1941. This marked the start of the series of raids on the cities targeted for their docks, vitally maintaining the British supply lines. While the docks and factories were hit, residential areas suffered too. The raid left 165 people dead and the same number injured. Cardiff was bombed again on consecutive nights in early March. On the 13th and 14th of March 1941, the town of Clydebank was hit by 2 nights of devastating raids. Clydebank was in the industrial area of Clydeside, to the west of Glasgow. The housing stock consisted of mainly tenement buildings, many of which were overcrowded. Air raid shelter provisions were inadequate. Out of a population of around 50,000, 35,000 people were made homeless. The Scottish Regional Commissioner described the Clydebank Blitz as a major disaster. Belfast experienced its first air raid on the 7th and 8th of April 1941. Its docks and shipyard were the primary target, although, as in other dockside cities, the residential areas nearby were badly hit. The city was blitzed again on 15th of April. The raid lasted for 5 hours. As fires burned out of control, fire crews were sent from both the Irish Republic and the mainland Britain. By 1944, the official death toll from this raid was 745. The British government had anticipated air attacks on its population centres, and it had predicted catastrophic casualties. A Luftwaffe terror bombing attack on a Spanish city on April 26, 1937, during the Spanish Civil War had killed hundreds of civilians and destroyed much of the town. On September 1st, 1939, the day World War II began with Germany invasion to Poland, the British government implemented a massive evacuation plan. Over the course of 3 days, some 1.5 million civilians, the overwhelmingly majority of them were children, were transported from urban areas to rural areas that were believed to be safe. The mass relocation, called Operation Pied Piper, was the largest internal migration in British history. Authorities quickly implemented plans to protect Londoners from bombs and to house those left homeless by the attacks. The national government also provided funds to local communities to construct public air raid shelters. The Air Raid Precaution Department distributed more than 2 million Anderson shelters, named after Sir John Anderson, head of the ARP. These shelters were made of corrugated steel. They were designed to be dug into the garden and then covered with dirt. While Anderson shelters offered good protection from bomb fragments and debris, they were cold and damp and generally ill-suited for prolonged occupation. Because basements, a logical destination in the event of an air raid, were a relative rarity in Britain, the ARP devised the Morrison shelter, named for Home Secretary Herbert Morrison, as an alternative to the Anderson shelter. This type of shelter, essentially a low steel cage large enough to contain 2 adults, 2 small children, was designed to be set up indoors and could serve as a refuge if the building began to collapse. A modern bomb sensors has attempted to pinpoint the location of every bomb dropped on London during the Blitz, and the visualisation of that data makes it clear how thoroughly the Luftwaffe saturated the city. Air raid damage was widespread. Hospitals, clubs, churches, museums, residentials, the shopping streets, hotels, public houses, theatres, schools, monuments, newspaper offices, embassies and London Zoo were bombed. While some of the poorer and more crowded suburban areas suffered severely, the mansions of Mayfair, the luxury flats of Kensington and Buckingham Palace itself, which was bombed on 4 separate occasions, fared little better. Although casualties were heavy, at no time did they approach the estimates that had been made before the war. Only a fraction of the available hospital and ambulance capacity were ever utilised. When the Blitz began, the government enforced a blackout in an attempt to make targeting more difficult for the German night bombers. Streetlights, car headlights and illuminated signs were kept off. People hung black curtains in their windows so no light showed outside their houses. When a bombing raid was imminent, air raid sirens were set off to sound a warning. At the beginning of the Blitz, British anti-aircraft gunners struggled to inflict meaningful damage on the German bombers, but later in development in radar guidance greatly improved the effectiveness of both anti-aircraft, artillery and searchlights. Another defensive measure employed by the British was barrage balloons, large oval-shaped unmanned balloons with stabilising tail fins, installed in and around major target areas. These balloons were the largest of which was some 60 feet long, were essentially an airspace denial tool. They prevented low-flying aircraft from approaching their targets at optimal altitudes and angles of attack. The higher the German planes had to fly to avoid the balloons, the less accurate they were when dropping their bombs. While the balloons themselves were an obvious deterrent, they were anchored to the ground by steel tethers that were strong enough to damage or destroy any aircraft that flew into them. Over 100 German planes made contact with barrage balloon cables during the Blitz, and 2/3 of them crashed or made a forced landing on British soil. The Blitz, often remembered through photographs of ruined streets, burning buildings and bomb-damaged cities, but behind every image were ordinary people trying to carry on with daily life in extraordinary circumstances. For 8 months, millions lived with uncertainty. They worked, travelled, slept in shelters, and woke each morning not knowing what the night had brought to the other parts of the country. The Blitz didn't just test Britain's defences, it tested the endurance of an entire population. Today, many scars have disappeared, buildings have been rebuilt, streets restored, bomb sites forgotten. Yet, all across Britain, traces of the Blitz still remain, often hidden in plain sight. Next time you walk through your own town or city, take a moment to look around. Chances are you're standing somewhere that has its own wartime story, whether you realise it or not. Because history isn't always found in museums and books. Sometimes it's beneath your feet, behind a sealed doorway, or in a street you've walked down hundreds of times without ever knowing what happened there. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.